Well, welcome everyone to the What's Next for POS and Friction-Free Shopping webinar, which is hosted by RIS News and presented by Capgemini. Hello, I'm Joe Scarufa, Editorial Director of RIS, and I'm really glad you could be with us today. Now, retail is riding a major wave of digital store investment. Traditional POS systems are quickly evolving into an ecosystem that delivers a cloud mobile, AI-infused, Uber-style frictionless shopping experience. Now, choosing and implementing a POS can be a nerve-wracking experience because retail is expected to deliver compelling omnichannel customer experiences on top of optimizing cash management and accessing stock information across multiple locations, store formats, and even franchise partners. POS needs to deliver without appearing invasive as much personalization in the store as online, and to become more convenient than competitive brands or marketplaces like Amazon that sell directly to consumers. Now, in today's webinar, we will check on the latest research from Forrester and get end-user perspectives from Intel and Capgemini about options to deploy new technologies that will help you win and retain retail customers, as well as build a sustainable competitive advantage. You will have the opportunity to ask questions to our panel of experts and learn about examples of best practices in POS evaluation, selection, and implementation. So stick with us today for a webinar that offers practical tips about what you need to know about how your next POS can deliver friction-free shopping. Now, here with us today to discuss this important topic are George Lowry of Forrester, David Dobson of Intel, and Martin Van Vogt of Capgemini. Now, George Lowry is Vice President and Principal Analyst for Forrester, who brings more than 2 decades of experience deploying global enterprise resource planning, ERP applications, into complex multinational corporations. During his 5 years with Forrester, George has led research into topics such as best practices in ERP consolidation, IT investment prioritization, global data synchronization, and trade promotion management. So welcome today, George. I'm really glad you could be with us.
Well, thanks so much. I'm glad to be with you too.
Looking forward to your presentation, George. And joining us today, as I mentioned, is David Dobson. He's Intel's Global Industry Director for the Retail, Hospitality, and Consumer Goods Industries. And David's focus is on end-user engagement and transformative projects. His current areas of research and engagement include the future of the store in the new digital age, how and where retailers turn data into competitive advantage, the role of technology within the cross-channel shopper journey, the use of cloud technologies, and how to reduce waste in the supply chain. So I'm also glad you could be with us today, David. Welcome.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, my privilege to be here.
And our final panelist is Martin Van Vogt. He's the Global POS Lead for Capgemini's Consumer Products, Retail, and Distribution Division. He has deep experience in retail consulting with food and non-food retailers in the Netherlands and internationally. Martin's current areas of research and engagement include the future of the store in the new digital age, the role of technology within the cross-channel shopper experience, and how to reduce waste in the supply chain. So welcome, Martin. Glad you can be here, and now is your chance to correct me on the pronunciation or mispronunciation of your last name.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, that's a bit difficult with the T. It's Martin van Vught, but it's okay. I'm also glad to be here and co-presenting together with George and David.
Thank you. Yes, I guess I was close, but no cigar. So listen, before we get started, I want to make sure this webinar is as interactive as possible and let everyone who is attending today know that your feedback is important to us. So please use the web tools on your screen and send us questions or comments at any time during the webinar, and I guarantee it'll be much more fun and informative for all of us that way. And basically, the more you contribute comments and questions, the better it's going to be for you and for us. Okay, let's begin with a question for George. I always ask George the tough ones because he basically can handle them. So here we go, George. This is the year 2019, and 2020 is not far away. So why focus on POS now? Why not focus on such cutting-edge technologies like AI or machine learning or shopper tracking or robotics? why focus on the store as well? Isn't the digital world where only retail action is today? So, George,
Well,
that softball question, what do you advise?
that's a great and very provocative question, Joe. Do you know what, though? Still, the vast majority of retail is either transacted or fulfilled in the store. The store, in fact, is still a very, very important part of the customer experience. And from the retailer's perspective, the point of sale is not so much a point, really, it's a point of service, and it's becoming a really important element in the whole path to purchase. So it's true that people might start their shopping at home, perhaps, online. They might continue on their mobile device, but it's still in the store normally that they get to touch and feel, and most importantly, to experience new products. That's where they find new products, and you know that innovation is a very important part of winning and continuing to win market share.
Absolutely true. I knew you could handle the question. So tell us about those research findings.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, Joe? I missed it.
Okay. I was just saying that I knew you would handle the tough question, but tell us about those research findings that comes from your Forrester background and how that can apply to choosing your next POS.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is that there's I would say two tendencies which are coming together. One is in the customer's behavior, and I talked a little bit about that. We were just talking with some customers this morning, and they were saying, well, you know, are there really practical cross-channel instances that require point of sale to be more advanced? And the answer is yeah. One of the most important ones is that people buy online, they return in the store. You need to have a really great returns process, which needs to run through your point of service. So that's one thing. The second thing is that actually, I would say the technology has advanced enormously. So that what we're seeing people deploy now is typically applications which run a little bit in the cloud, a little bit on a mobile device, perhaps on the associate's device, perhaps on a fixed device, perhaps even on the consumer's own device or customer's own device. And the technology is now in place to do that, but also to mine a terrific amount of information and to give people really some contextual content depending on where they are, what time of day it is, what day it is. And that's making a terrific difference, Joe.
So friction-free shopping, that is something I hear a lot about in the marketplace. It's a goal. It's you know, I suppose a goal tied to a strategy. How do you achieve it?
It's interesting, Joe, because one of my customers said to me something which really stuck in my head. They said, you know, when you are with Uber, you don't see the transaction. It's invisible. And of course, all of us have looked at Amazon Go, and many of us will be using contactless cards all the time. So what will be involved in this friction-free, it's really minimizing the transaction. So it's using the technology that we have to make the transaction a smaller and smaller part of the experience, if that makes sense, Joe.
Absolutely. So let's get to our agenda for this part of our webinar. I'm going to put up the agenda slide here, George, and let's just jump into our key topics.
Perfect. I'll take it away from here. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what's happening in retail, recapping some of the stuff that you, of course, know, Joe, and I'm sure that most of the people in the audience also know this. But I'm then going to say, what does it mean for store systems, and in particular, these new technologies that I was talking about. And then I'm going to be a bit provocative, and I'm going to tell you why your point of sale or your point of service is holding you back. I'll look at what's happening to retail around really transition from systems to platforms, and I'm going to be really presumptuous and make some suggestions about what people in our audience should do now. So let's talk a bit about what's happening in retail. We can't, I'm going to go back one, I'm sorry, we can't ever stop thinking about what Amazon Go is doing. But the point about it, can everybody have all those sensors all around the store, all that enormous technology investment? Probably not. But what it shows us is that retail really is a hub of innovation, and it's shaping customer experiences, but most of all, it's shaping their expectations as well. And what do we see around this? If we look at US retail, and this is, by the way, the same in other countries as well, we see that a terrific amount of retail it's shaped by what's happening online. So the store, as we said, is terribly important, but it's typically shaped by what's happening online. And we think a little bit about the journey, or this path to purchase that I talked about. We think about people discovering. And remember, I talked about new things, new products, new releases from consumer packaged goods companies, in particular, new offerings that retailers come up with themselves. People discover them. Actually, they discover them in the store to a very large extent. They can perhaps discover them with Google and Amazon too. What will they do next? They're going to explore. And we know this from our own consumer panel. We know that people, when they find a new thing in the store, they take out their phone, they scan the barcode, and they try and understand more about it. They also understand which of their friends have bought it. They understand, has it been environmentally, been produced in an environmentally responsible way. And of course, they try and find it, see if they can buy it cheaper somewhere else. So they always do a price check. We know 75% of people do that. So if you move on to the next stage, they could also buy, they could buy in the store, but they could buy with Amazon as well. So you can see that Amazon is there right at the beginning of this cycle. We think about the customer and the retention of the customer and delighting them. That goes on when they use the product, when they ask, and when they perhaps engage more about it. So we think of this as really kind of a cycle that they're engaged in. But the thing that I want you to notice and to think about is that if you're a retailer, Amazon potentially is there ahead of you in the cycle. So they've been there perhaps a little bit earlier than you have, perhaps in that discovery stage. So what does all that mean for your store systems? Here's the interesting thing that we found. We found that 71% of customers or consumers have chosen, recommended, or paid more for a brand or a product, or perhaps in a retailer that provided a personalized service or experience. So it's the personalization. Remember, I talked about the technology that enables us to do this much more easily than ever before. What we have to think is, how can we make that path to purchase, how can we make it more personal for each of the consumers? Most interestingly, in an omni-channel world, the in-store personalization ranks top of the list. And for the question that you asked earlier, Joe, about why do we care about point of sale? Because it's that in-store touch point that people really care about. Now, I talked a little bit about what's really driving the consumer or the customer. I talked about this cycle. Here's something that's very interesting. What do they look at? They look for best price. I already mentioned that. We expect them to do that. They're price checking. But look at this. They're looking about enjoying the experience. They're looking about how easy it is to find what they're looking for, the convenience of their shopping. And most importantly, they're looking at doing more product research. So two of the other panelists are looking at sustainability and supply chain. This is incredibly important to consumers. They want to research and understand more about what they're buying. And each of those really is driven by content. And this is why we think about content and commerce and point of sale as being very tightly related. Now, I promised that I would tell you why your point of sale is potentially holding you back. It's because in this journey that we talked about, this path to purchase, there are different devices, of course. We talked about a kind of digital world. We talked about an offline world. We talked about a mobile world. But the systems of engagement that try to identify the customer and try to personalize what they're seeing, the systems of insight, which mine to understand, will they really be susceptible to a promotion? Can we upsell them? Can we cross-sell them? All of these are basically fragmented. And it means that the critical thing for retailers is to bring all this together around the basket. The basket is the really critical thing. And this is why we're seeing really smart retailers thinking about that basket starts as soon as they're doing their research when they're at home. It goes onto their mobile device. It continues in the store. And perhaps they move the basket from the cloud or from their own device to an associate's device to help them solve it, perhaps to a fixed device. So you can see that this idea of the basket, being able to think about that as having a life, having a time span, is incredibly important to solving this high expectation of customers for us to service them across all their devices, and in particular to understand their profiles. So it's not just their personal, their let's say their personalization, but their profile could be different at different times. Their behaviors might be different on different times of day, different days of the week. Also to understand their sentiment. So what are they feeling now? What's their attitude? To understand, to present the right content to them, and perhaps to help them to understand what their friends' reviews and ratings are, and to bring all of that into one place. So the context, the location, the time, the situation, what they've done so far. We think a lot in our research about their path to purchase. When they're first thinking about it, perhaps price isn't so important. Price becomes more important as they're getting closer to making a purchase. So to orchestrate all of this and to do it in real time and dynamically calculate intent is really where people are going with store systems. One of my clients put it brilliantly. She said, really, retail is a huge laboratory with millions and millions of natural experiments going on hour by hour. She said, but the compound that we're dealing with is the most volatile known to man. It's human intention. And she thinks a lot about this, about how can you dynamically understand their intention and then deliver personalized content to them equally across every channel, every screen. And if you think it's difficult now, it's going to get more difficult. We think about the different ways in which our consumers interact with us. In future, there's going to be voice as well. This is an application that already exists, both on an iPad and with Alexa. And it's one that Nestle put together. And the reason they did it is because they know when people are cooking and looking at recipes, they might start with their iPad, but now their hands are full. You can see this gentleman here has his hands full with the Alfredo, and he's asking his robot overlord, he's asking Alexa what to do next. Now, I have to say, I very frequently get calls from our clients saying, we know how to, for example, populate the title in Amazon. We know how to populate search engines. But how will people search differently when it's by voice? And how can I organize my content to work that way? So this thing, thinking about this continuum, a path to purchase, of which the point of sale is a part, has to understand a lot of different things, content, intent, and different ways of interacting, including in future, voice. And this is really why I wanted to talk about the rise of retail platforms. We know already that a significant amount of e-commerce is taking place through marketplaces like Amazon, and it's going to increase even more. And that means really, as a retailer, you've got to think about your store, which is differentiating for you, and think about the technology that you have in there. How can you make it stable or sustainable? How can you keep that platform that you have, but still keep innovating? So I like this very much, that one of our clients said, in the current climate, speed is all that matters. And you all know this. You make small changes to your point of sale. You might add, for example, credit at the point of sale because people like a lot of credit as they're coming up to holiday or Christmas time. But actually to do that and to test it, normally with most point of sale technology, that's pretty difficult. This also is another very good quotation. We used to have projects that lasted 1 or 2 years, and you know, a rollout of point of sale used to take that kind of time. I used to do loads of these years ago, but now you've got to do it in 1 or 2 quarters. Why? Because you've got to stay ahead of the game. So what does that really mean? Well, this is an example that I took from Waitrose. They have a great example here where they have the basket really is created in the cloud, but can be accessed and can be added to on any device. including the associate's own device, including self-checkout, including the customer's own mobile device. So they can scan, they can pay, but they can also take advantage of one promotions engine that runs across all of this, of one e-commerce integration. So the important thing is when you're thinking about your new point of sale, that it should support all of these elements. Also equally important, I wanted to pop this in here, is to think about what you might orchestrate in terms of the experience. Dunelm, some of you might know it, is quite small, but very innovative furniture retailer. Now they're competing all the time with Wayfair. Many of you will know what Wayfair is like. You know that the content is fantastic and that it's very well displayed to you in the context of what you're doing and what you've done before. Now for Dunelm, what they really had to do was to orchestrate their own experience at point of sale and the e-commerce to make sure that their content was at least competitive with what people were seeing on Wayfair. So these platforms then are platforms which are partly in the cloud, but partly have elements running on the associate's device, on a fixed point of sale, or perhaps on the customer's own device. What then should you be doing about it now? Well, our advice is that you really need to be thinking about create a digital store transformation program. And we have an entire workbook around this, around how to get there, how to start, how to create the business case. But what essentially it is, it creates a platform, one of these ideas that we talked about, that will enable you to plug in different devices, but also to ingest different content and to be able to customize it and present it at the right point of the path to purchase. Equally, to be able to ingest different streams of data. And that data, well, it might be social data, it might even be perhaps search engine arguments, what are people looking for, to enable you to anticipate what the customer is going to want. Well, those are some ideas that we've had from our research. What I'd like to do now, though, is to ask you to participate in a survey. So we've got two little questions here in this survey, and the first one really is, how do you plan to deploy your POS? Will you deploy it as a fixed station? Will you deploy it as a mobile device? Or will you have a kind of frictionless POS that recognizes the person perhaps by their face and because you already have their profile, charges them for what they already bought and took with them? Or perhaps you're going to do all of these. That's option D. So you can choose option A, option B, option C, or if you want to, option D. Goodness, I can see we've already got some responses, and I can see that, well, so far the people who've responded have all responded option D. That's pretty interesting. Oh wait, no, we've got one person who's going to do a fixed station as well. That's interesting. All right, we'll see if there's going to be
George,
more.
the interesting thing about a question like this is the strategy for retailers. Now, some retail formats, as you can imagine, don't feel like they are omnichannel, very omnichannel. So until recently, for example, although you did mention Waitrose, a lot of grocers did not feel like they were omnichannel, and so they really focused on their fixed station. And then as grocery transitioned, they really had to move away from a pure fixed station approach, and so it's not surprising to see that kind of all of the above is rising here to the level of our majority. And then George, let's switch down to question number 2, and why don't you tell us a little bit about that one?
Well, do you want me to shall I send these results to the audience though, because they haven't seen the results? It's interesting because we've got people who are choosing each of the 3. So I'm sending the results now to the audience, and they should see them. Okay. So I think you're right, Joe. It does depend quite a lot on the format of retail. What are you doing? Let's let's try with the second one then.
Yes. So here we can see that we're asking about which sales channel does your POS use? And only in stores. I suppose if we wanted to call something traditional, that would be traditional, since POS in stores was launched in, I think, 1973. So that's how retailers were used to doing it. But the second option here is POS solution for stores and online, and then a single omnichannel solution for both stores and online. So should it be only stores? Should it be separate for one for stores, a different system for online, or a single for both? And it looks like the votes are still coming in. We have quite a few voters now, but it looks like the single omnichannel for both stores is leading. Both stores and online.
Okay.
So, yeah. So it looks like omnichannel retailing is something that retailers look at when they analyze and assess their POS strategy.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I'm going to go back. We've seen those two interesting results, and thanks, Joe, for your comments on them. I'm going to go back to the slides, and we were talking here about this idea of a platform that would help you to innovate, would give you the sustainability and help you to innovate. These are my contact details if any of you would like to contact me, because this is the research that I use. You'll get a copy of this, and if you would like a copy of any of these reports, then please feel free to email me and to ask me. And I'm going to ask, I think David's going to talk now.
Hey, thanks, George. Yeah, and thanks to the audience for the responses. Really interesting and thought-provoking comments from George, and yeah, really good responses from the team. So, my name is David Dobson. As Joe mentioned earlier, I work for Intel Corporation. I'm just going to talk a little bit today about some of the challenges, specifically from a hardware perspective. Oh, there's a bit of a noise on the line. Right, specifically from a hardware perspective, with some of the challenges that are going to occur for retailers when they go down, especially this omni-channel and multi-device environment. So what we're seeing is sort of four major challenges. The first one around the cost and the complexity of different hardware choices. As George mentioned, as Joe mentioned, and as we got feedback from the team, people are not just having a single device to manage in the store anymore. There's typically different devices, different formats of devices, different operating systems running on those devices, which is the point two, maybe even different software components running on the different devices you might have. An experience for mobile is very different to the experience that you run on your POS, for example. These systems are still managed from a central location. You need that remote management, and how do you manage those devices across potentially hundreds or thousands of stores, and maybe internationally as well as cross-border type challenges. And then the fourth one, which is perhaps 10 years ago we wouldn't have talked about so much, but now that the POS systems and the store systems are connected to the internet, are more open to the world, how do you protect these systems, and how do you protect your systems from malicious attacks? So we've got a couple of concepts on here around the challenges, a little bit more detail on what I said, and then some of the answers from an Intel perspective. So we provide solutions that have a common device architecture and can flex from the smallest to the largest devices. We provide, and this is not very well known and not hugely leveraged across the industry, but within our silicon, we actually provide management tools like vPro that enable you to do remote management at the hardware level and beneath your software and beneath your operating system. So you have an extra level of redundancy. So you won't be coming across these locked devices. You'll be able to you'll be able to manage those devices even in the most extreme failure cases, and often even use those device management tools to reduce the power output. Do your POS systems all need to be on at all times? So if you can manage these devices remotely, then maybe you can start to think about power saving. And again, built into the silicon, at the silicon level, we have some key security technologies. Some of the critical POS hardware capabilities that we like to talk about that's going to help with all of those 4 challenges that we talked about before. There's a drive towards solid state devices. Less moving parts on the device means more resilience. We talked a little bit about remote management and advanced security and a common architecture. But equally, you want support for multiple operating systems these days. Some operating system choices you may want to make based on the application, based upon the device itself, based upon the experience you want to present, or based upon the skills that you have inside your businesses. You want to have that choice, and you want to manage across multiple environments, and absolutely, hardware needs to be able to do that. And then you also want to have a platform for innovation. So yes, of course, your applications need to run on those environments. You need to have an environment that will be able to move forward and provide all of these flexible and new functions and features that we can't necessarily predict over the next coming years, the challenges that you have. And a lot of that is revolving around some of the innovation that's happening in the media or in the video space. And then the final piece from our perspective is, you want to choose the vendors that work for you, whether that's the software, whether that's the hardware package, whether it's the operating system, whether that's some of the technologies that Joe mentioned at the beginning, which cloud do I connect with, what AI tools do I want to use. All of that comes with you making that selection as a customer and selecting the right solutions for you, and the platform needs to provide that vendor choice. So one of the things that we talked about earlier and that we've started to recognize has become really more important, specifically at the POS, is video analytics. So people are starting to put cameras in the store, not necessarily recording video footage, but think of a camera as a sensor. So can you, instead of recording just raw video footage, can you use those cameras to detect activity that's happening? And some of the key use cases around this, obviously, George mentioned earlier the Amazon Go store, where you've got videos driving the whole in-store experience. But some people are actually thinking about this from a slightly different perspective and saying, well, can we just solve some specific use cases or problems with video? And can we help us get there faster? So first one is faster through the checkout. Can you start to recognize items as opposed to somebody struggling to find out where the barcode is on an item, or if an item doesn't have a barcode, can you use a camera to actually spot those items and automatically have it displayed for your customers or for your staff who are going through the same process? The second piece, and really important, let's not forget that POS was implemented in the very early days to reduce fraud inside the store, and video can improve whatever we have within fraud detection systems today. So it can track patterns of behavior that may indicate fraud happening. I think we've all heard of the types of stories around self-checkout where somebody scans a cheap bottle of wine and puts maybe an expensive bottle of wine in their bag. Well, a camera could check that activity, spot that being done, and alert somebody to come and talk to that person about the mistake that they may have made in their scanning process. So we're starting to see that fraud detection being used around these camera-based sensors. So if you have these cameras doing these things, well, you're also starting to understand about who is coming into your store. So can you use it to understand, maybe anonymously, the types of demographic, the traffic patterns where people are moving through the store, starting to unlock some of that insight in terms of how your store is being used by your shoppers. And then, as I say, the fourth, and perhaps the one that's got most traction today, is the frictionless experience. Can you use an all-video equipped store to create a new environment for shopping for people? But let's not forget the other three. I think the other three have real tactical opportunities for people to improve the experience today without the huge potential capital investment required to do a frictionless environment. And from an Intel perspective, we've done a lot of work in all of these use cases, and we've got a little link there to some of the work that we've got with our OpenVINO toolkit, and we've got a lot of models pre-built and pre-trained, accelerated solution packages for you to go and accelerate your development in this area. So those were the 3 slides I was just going to talk to you about on our section today. So I'm going to flip the slide, and then I'm going to hand over to Martin, who is going to present the next section of the webinar. Martin? Hi, Martin, are you there?
Sorry, I was on mute. Thanks, David. Maybe a small warning for the audience. After 2 native speakers with a British accent, you have to deal now with a Dutch accent. David was talking about the focus on hardware. My part will be more on the software side. But I think it's good to understand that, and I will talk a bit about that later, and you can see also the logos from both Capgemini and Intel on this slide and the previous slides. Capgemini and Intel are closely working together on an initiative, what's called the Smart Digital Store. But I will talk a bit about that later. First, and Joe was already mentioning this in his introduction, talking about AI. Although this webinar is not about AI, I slightly would like to touch on it because I think there is a kind of link between AI and point of sale, and I will explain you what, in my view, that link is also in a minute. Looking at this pie and the Gantt chart, it's coming from a Capgemini report called Building the Retail Superstar, how unleashing AI across functions offers a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. A mouthful, but the report is available. It's reported from the end of last year. But what you can see, and that's why I think it's interesting, is that there are a lot of opportunities, and retailers across different subsectors and countries are already implementing AI. And I think, as for many innovations, you see that what I would call the non-food retailers are ahead of the game and implementing AI more than from a food perspective. And I think what's also triggered me, if you look at the last line of the graph, luxury is not at the front end of the adapters and implementers of AI. That's surprising me a bit. But again, this is not something that I would cover in more detail. What I would like to show you in my next slide is that if you look at AI from a store perspective, and looking at the red box, there are quite some areas and opportunities where AI play a role and can play a role, and again, the link with POS, point of sale, I will give you in a minute. Because it's all about improving your proposition to your customers and also talking about personalized offers, as also George already talked a bit about. Dynamic pricing and those kind of things can be used if you have your AI also in order on top of your point of sale. So why bringing this up? David talked a bit about a video. And video and AI are tied together, and also the point of sale in this, in my opinion, because the point of sale is still the basis, the fundament, so to say, of all data used together with AI. It's coming from the point of sale. It's coming from all other devices in the store. So talking about frictionless stores, it's all the devices that bring you the data, and you have to deploy that using AI. And not only from a point of sale perspective, talking about the offline the stores, but of course also coming from your web shop, and that will also be clarified when I talk a bit more about the Smart Digital Store initiatives that I already mentioned. So talking about the fundament, the right and modern point of sale should provide you, or at least your customers of course, a consistent experience both online and offline. And that's also what George talked about, using his term like a platform where everything is coming together. And talking about things coming together and talking about our Smart Digital Store initiative. This initiative is lasting now for a couple of years together with Intel, and it's bringing together the online offline world with all devices, and we address that in 4 key dimensions. So all data that we collect from the single devices with the point of sale as a kind of heart in that is covering propositions and improving processes towards the customer, the employee, the product, and also the physical store itself. So talking about Smart Digital Store as an initiative, we have built quite a platform and framework of a number of offerings. A lot of detail in this slide. It's not my intention to cover it all at this very moment, but I think it's important to understand that this Smart Digital Store framework, a set of offerings that is able to support your ambitions and your innovation power. Also the cycle coming from device, deploy, sustain and discover is covered in this, and we are happy to share our experience in using this platform for many retailers already. And also this information can be found on our website. I already mentioned a couple of times that the point of sale is the fundament, the basis for a lot of things to improve the experience of the customer in the store. And also, like George mentioned, it's part of the path to purchase that's indefinite, but that you would like to take away from your customer. But still, the software will be needed for a long time, even during when you use or implement the clicks in the store. You will still have a lot of processes to cover via what we currently still call the point of sale. If we then go to, I think it's a real unique asset that Capgemini has. Starting over more than 10 years ago, we collected from a big number of point of sale vendors a lot of data coming from a questionnaire that we sent out every 2 years. We started off with, well, more the general retail questions, and we built it out to an enormous database of solutions. As also mentioned, looking at the Forrester Wave report, 90% of the vendors mentioned in that report are covered in our tool, including a number of additional number of vendors with really in-depth knowledge and information about things like not only the general information, but also about architecture. Is it a cloud solution? Is it whatever kind of technology is behind it? So from an architecture and technology perspective, so we have quite some questions that we are covering in our tool. This tool has been used successfully in quite some projects for customers all over the globe, not only in Europe, but also in the US and in Asia. I will give you an example of one of the retailers we have used the tool rather recently. And what we have done, because we started, as I mentioned, talking about the point of sale for more the general retail, since this year, beginning of this year, we also added the second point of sale tool for the QSR market, the quick service restaurants market. What's bigger in the US than in Europe, especially where the big companies are. So we own more, as you can say, the solution, the point of sale tool for the global one for retail from the Netherlands, and from the US, the ownership is taken for the QSR tool. But in both, for both instances, it's important to understand that we have a lot of knowledge and experience using all kinds of material that we have collected over the years to support your processes, finding a new point of sale, and again, the fundament of a lot of things that you have to do as a retailer. Closing my part of the presentation is showing you an example of what was a Pan-Asian retailer. This retailer has many different brands over at least 11 countries in Asia, a lot of stakeholders, and we managed by using our tool, our templates, and our approach, we managed to support them and save them a lot of time in the total timeline of starting from nothing, from a very long list, towards a short list and a final decision on what solution to choose. So we performed the RFI, request for information process, the request for proposal process, and also support them in the final phase of negotiations with all the information that we have gathered over the years and have in our point of sale tool. If you want to have more information either about our tool, about Smart Digital Store, about our reports as Capgemini, please go to our website. And on the next slide, you can find my contacts and also contacts from my colleagues working in the point of sale area in the US. So happy to support you. And this is closing down my part of the presentation. Back to you, Joe. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Martin. And I do see, I want to alert all of our attendees to our webinar today that we do have questions coming in, questions and comments. We have quite a few. We're going to try to get to all of them here, but please send those comments in because we're going to tailor our discussions at this point to your comments. So basically what I'm announcing is that we're going to enter our summary discussion and audience Q&A segment and keep those questions and comments coming. And if by chance we do get quite a few comments in and don't get to all of them, we will definitely follow up with everyone by email. So the first question I'm going to toss over to you, George, is that I believe you had a slide, and this comes from a listener, a viewer, that you said that investing in POS is a top priority. And I have to say that I have polled spend trends among retailers for a number of years, and honestly, it shows up pretty high just about every year, although it does go in cycles. So, George, what's your reference point on that? Why did you say that you think right now POS is a top investment priority?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because traditionally retailers have seen it as a kind of, I don't know, a kind of hygiene factor. Well, I suppose we'll have to upgrade it, and they try to put it off as long as possible. Used to be, didn't they, a kind of 7-year cycle, and then we saw some data saying they were trying to make it a 10-year cycle. But the thing is, it's this path to purchase thing, and it's also the point about, let's say, being able to capitalize on the store and its differentiation in terms of experience from sitting at home with your iPad shopping on Amazon. And that's what's making people think a lot more about it. So a lot of people are thinking, actually, the store is something we have that Amazon doesn't, or of course it has the Amazon Go stores, but what can we do now to capitalize on that? And how can we, let's say, make our point of sale, first of all, a point of service and not a point of sale, and secondly, how can we make it not a point, but something which is a set of services and content that they experience through the whole path to purchase? Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah, it does. And let me bring in David for the next question. This also relates to a comment we received from our audience. And David, I I can't tell you how many times in years past I heard from retailers say that they want speed, speed, speed through the checkout. That's our number one priority. You give me that, I'm happy. But now we're asking them to actually, not to them, but I mean the vendors and retailers to layer on top many, many other functions, such as dealing with electronic shelf labels, which has come in as a question to us, and other touch points and other services and other functions among POS. Is it our contention here, and David, I'm asking you this question, that POS should be able to do it all, speed and accommodate those other services and functions?
Okay, great question, Joe. So I think I'd just take one step back. I think we get into a mode where we talk about retail and retailers as if every retail outlet and every retailer does the same thing. But
Right.
The truth is there's different experiences and there's different modes that people are in when they're going shopping. Now, essentially, yes, the POS has to fulfill all of those needs, all of those different needs, whether it's an Amazon Go experience or whether it's a more traditional grocery experience or maybe it's an electronics shop. So the first thing is you need a flexible platform to be able to deliver those different store experiences for different audiences. And you as an individual, when you go shopping, you shop in different modes, right? So if I'm going for my family staples shop, I want convenience, I want speed. If I can't get away without shopping, maybe for some people, they'll do everything online, right? But if I'm going for that purchase that I've been thinking about for the last month, that my friend showed me this cool thing that I want to go buy, it's a completely different shopping experience. And then the same to POS, if we flip a little bit to electronic shelf edge labels, there's a place for electronic shelf edge labels, and it makes sense for people who want to deliver a different experience to their shoppers. It could be driven by regulation. Some European countries have some regulation in place that means without electronic shelf edge labels, it's difficult to make sure your price is on the edge of the shelves of what your POS is selling. So that could be one driver. In terms of the customer experience, people are playing with shelf edge labels to maybe do some advertising on those labels to attract people to the shelves. They're also providing some 2D code where you could actually scan and on your mobile phone find out more product information about the items on the shelves, so they're making them an interaction point. And so there's lots of innovation happening in that space. And as I go back to my original point, I think it needs to fit in with your strategy of how you want that customer experience to be, and then have the right technology to map to that customer experience. I think that's the winning strategy.
Okay, David, let's build on that point and bring Martin into the discussion. Martin, one of the interesting things about your presentation was one section had a focus on leading edge technologies, and I can't tell you another thing I haven't heard, I've heard a million times throughout the years, is that POS is a conservative technology. It's the most conservative technology in a store because you want it to be, you want it never to fail. And because of that, is that really the place where you want to experiment with cutting-edge technology? I think you mentioned AI. I think you mentioned the capability of building in voice search. We've mentioned here electronic labels. How do you do that safely? What case studies or examples do you have where these things are rolled out safely and it does not impact the key transactional and speed nature of POS?
I would like to take the answer a bit broader than that, Joe. I agree, it's not the most innovative part of the store or the store environment. If you look at what a point of sale or I'm not allowed to use the word till from George, but I will use it. The older tills in the old days, 100 years back, the registration process from that perspective is not that different. But just the capabilities of the point of sale from a software perspective have been enormously grown. And we have had a time that it was almost a kind of enterprise resource platform, the ERP for a retailer. Then they brought it to the cloud or to a central solution, and later on to the cloud. So there is still a lot of work to do, because more and more, in my opinion, the point of sale is the heart of the retailing, and it's remaining the heart of the retailing. Also referring to a white paper that we currently have refreshed and will be published on a rather short notice. Because everything is coming together there, and it's the basis for all the other processes and stuff that you're doing towards your customers. It's not probably not exactly answering your question, but it's evolving.
Yes.
Joe,
Yes,
it's George. If I
absolutely.
could make a comment on
Please do.
that. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about this is that, yes, stores used to be entire little islands, and they kind of grew big in themselves, and then we started to try and join up the enterprise. But the thing that's really making a difference now is that chips themselves have become incredibly powerful, and memory has become incredibly cheap. And that's what's enabling all this visual stuff that David was talking about. You could deploy it at the edge of the network. It has now terrific amount of power and memory, and can be resilient because of that. So things in the past, you know, if you wanted to process an image, you'd have to pass it somewhere else to some great data center to do the work. You can do that on the spot now. That's what's really different and interesting now.
You know, we have another question, George. I was going to throw this out to you, but definitely bring in the others. And this has to do with the consumers themselves, the customers that walk into the store. And I know we are all doing our POS analysis based on what customers want and need, as well as the system's approach to making the store more efficient and productive. But what about the customers themselves? There are different generations of customers, for example. There are different generations of employees that use the POS system. How does that come into play during the POS analysis and assessment period?
It's certainly true that people think that younger customers and younger employees are going to be more, let's say, autonomous and more self-sufficient and want to do more discovery. Actually, our data shows it's not really related to age. It's related to attitude. So there are plenty of, let's say, silver surfers who are pretty keen to download their own application, to do their own scanning, to understand this, and to, let's say, be more autonomous in the process. It's certainly true that people are more empowered, and the more empowered they are, the more, in particular, the associates expect to have as much knowledge at their fingertips as the customers who've been at home perhaps doing 4 days research before they go and buy a set of golf clubs or a pair of skis. And if they don't have access to that directly in front of them, if they don't have video training to understand what the assortment is, if they don't know where all the inventory is or when the next lot is coming in, then they feel they're not really doing their jobs. And that's a really important element that's driving all of this.
Okay, Joe, it's David here.
Go ahead.
Hey, Joe, it's David here. Just one quick comment on that. I know we're almost out of time, but just the self-checkout was a great example, right? Older people love using self-checkout. Why? Because they can go at their own pace, and it's a more private interaction. People don't ask them why they've bought something. So they like those two aspects of it, and so that's going to apply to new technology. So I 100% agree with that. It's about what the technology can do and what your shopping would like to do, as opposed to how old they are.
And Martin, let's give you one last minute for a comment about how you deal with customer groups and how POS relates to that.
So I don't exactly understand what you mean with customer groups. Sorry, Joe.
Ages, millennials, Gen X.
Okay. Yeah, I think just covered by David and George. We have multiple ways to do the checkout nowadays. Not talking about the friction store. So everybody can choose their way for checking out, either the self-checkout on their mobile phones. So it's a bit like what George was talking about. So I think the freedom of choice, that will cover also the fact that you have different kinds of customers in different ages, etc.
Well, I'm afraid that's going to have to be our final word, Martin, and you got it. So thank you very much. That's going to wrap up our web conference for today, and anyone who wishes to revisit the presentation or wants to tell their colleagues about it, we're going to be posting it on the RIS News website at www.risnews.com. Now, we had a fantastic panel and great presentation, great slides, great data, great recommendations, and I really want to thank all three of you for your great insights into the important topic of POS in stores and really in the whole omnichannel platform that retailers present today to do the bulk of their business. So I also want to thank everyone in our audience for joining us today, and please join us again for the next RIS web session. Have a great day.